Hey guys, alright? Welcome everyone. The story begins a few days after Japan rid itself of a colossal monster, the so-called kaiju. At a school in Tokyo, there is a reunion of alumni when a special forces plane appears in the sky, and everyone rushes to the window. Someone asks if this could be a bad sign, fearing that the kaiju is resurrected, but their friends say there would be an alarm in that case. Just then, the sound of an alert begins, and everyone checks their phones, finding no emergency notification. They then discover it was just a bad prank. Yukino leaves the party to look for her ex-boyfriend, Arata. He is in the hallway talking on the phone with his colleagues from the special forces, and she is disappointed to hear that he is already leaving. We learn a bit more about recent events. Tokyo was attacked by the kaiju and practically destroyed until, suddenly, the monster was hit by a strong light and simply died. The entire area within a 10-kilometer radius around the body was evacuated and remains quarantined to this day. A satellite photo shows the bright flash at the moment it happened, but scientists cannot explain where this light came from. The government had to make a public statement denying that they used nuclear weapons. Prime Minister Nishio Otachime is giving a speech on national television, lamenting the loss of so many young lives and warning that the country remains in a state of emergency. When Yukino returns home, we meet her husband, Amane. They both work for the Japanese government, but before that, they were also special forces agents. The first thing Amane asks about the party is whether Arata was there. Yukino says she only saw him out of the corner of her eye, as he had to leave early because of work. In a malicious tone, Amane states that now that work is as dead as the kaiju. The special forces operate from a base near the kaiju's body, in an area where the huge footprints still mark the riverbank. We see that Amane is right when Arata arrives at the base and speaks with his friend Yuko. She complains that her job now boils down to taking down drones trying to snoop on the restricted zone. In the Prime Minister's office, Amane sees the expression Deus Ex Machina on a notepad. Otachime explains that this means a divine and inexplicable resolution, exactly what happened with the kaiju. Still unsettled by the mystery, he seems to fear that the monster is not actually dead. This concern also troubles the supervisor of the Special Forces, Shikishima, upon hearing that an increase in the kaiju's body temperature has been detected. However, specialists say this is just part of the decomposition process. This is precisely what Otachime is discussing with the ministers now. No one knows what to do with the kaiju's body, and each one starts pushing the issue onto someone else, inventing reasons to say it's not their responsibility. Furious with the mess, Otachime passes the buck to the Minister of Defense, Hiroto. He reluctantly accepts and asks for a budget from the Minister of Finance. Seeing this will take a while, Otachime clings to the idea that a security declaration is needed before removal can start. After the meeting, Otachime has a more informal conversation with Hiroto and confesses that he doesn't like the special forces much, as they were unable to defeat the kaiju. Since they are practically useless now, they might as well deal with getting that monster out of the river. The next day, Shikishima informs Arata that he will be responsible for the operation. Official visits begin, and we learn that Yukino is the secretary to the Minister of the Environment, Sayuri. She is surprised to see her ex-boyfriend leading the team and tries to greet him as formally as possible. However, he doesn't even notice the effort and responds in a way that makes it clear they already know each other. Accompanying the minister on the visit, Shikishima discreetly explains to Arata that she must be wanting to use the kaiju to promote herself. The group then flies over the river until they reach the fallen giant. The sight is impressive but also quite strange, as it still has one paw raised. Additionally, there is a very disgusting cut right in the middle of its body. In the Prime Minister's office, the discussion continues, and everyone is anxious about public opinion post-kaiju. Many people are still homeless, and the government budget is minimal because all the money went to defense, which proved useless. Sayuri arrives all flustered, showing the photos she took during the visit. This causes quite a sensation among the ministers, and Hiroto grows envious. He tries to show the satellite images but fumbles with the tablet and ends up displaying an inappropriate video. Then the Minister of Tourism, Wataru, says they could turn the whole situation around by transforming the kaiju into a tourist attraction. Calculating a few projections on the fly, he informs that demand will be huge, generating astronomical revenue for all the offices. The ministers get excited about the idea, and Otachime says it's necessary to expedite the security declaration. In a neighboring country, the news begins to poke fun at the Japanese government for the delay in removing the body, as well as the silence regarding the danger of toxins. Unlike all these politicians, at this moment, Arata and Yuko are getting their hands dirty. Together with some colleagues, they row down the river in a small boat and approach the kaiju in awe. The heat is intense near the body, and there is a strange bulge that no one had seen until now. While each thinks of a different hypothesis to explain it, Arata decides to be practical and pokes the bubble with a stick, bursting the shell and spreading goo all over the boat. Some even feel sick from the stench, and the bubble leaves a hole from which an intense vapor continuously escapes. Meanwhile, Minister Sayuri's car drives through a crowd of fanatics announcing the end of the world due to the kaiju's death. Ignoring them, Sayuri insists that the security declaration must come from the Ministry of the Environment and no one else. Yukino explains that other entities are conducting analyses, but her boss says that these results remain at the Special Forces base and suggests that Yukino use her friendship with Arata to obtain them. At the same time, Hiroto is speaking with his secretaries, who also want a piece of the credit. They say that removing the body will bring renewed hope to the population, and the gratitude will go to whoever steps up to solve the problem. In the lab, Yukino bribes a friend named Sayoko to obtain the initial analysis results. Remembering that this is confidential, Sayoko shows that no toxic substances have been found in the kaiju yet, and radioactivity is also zero. In the office, the ministers are already fighting again. Many rumors are circulating about the kaiju, and the body will soon start to rot in the heat. Once again, Sayuri interrupts the discussion with bombshell news and presents the report that Yukino stole, ensuring that there is no danger. But then we discover that Sayoko is having an affair with Amain and, at his request, delivered a false report to Yukino. The true results are somewhat different, as they indicate the presence of an unknown fungal filament. Amain passes this information to the Prime Minister 5 minutes before his press conference. In the ultimate irony, Otachime claims that he would rather protect the public from lesser concerns, and adds that the people have the right not to know. At the press conference, he declares the kaiju completely safe and then passes the word to Sayuri, who is live streaming from atop the monster. She assures that everything is fine, and even the fish in the river are healthy. Sayuri gets so carried away that she ends up falling face-first into the wound, and all of Japan sees her upside down. Despite this, the publicity stunt works. The neighboring country begins demanding possession of the kaiju, claiming it initially crossed over from there. Riding the wave, the Secretary General, Takanaka, says that the first step to turning the body into a tourist attraction is to give it a name. Otachime loves the idea, and Takanaka calls on the linguistics department, asking for suggestions in English. That same night, a group of workers drill into the kaiju and cause a small explosion. Shikishima starts to worry, as this is the second incident involving stinky goo. Unaware of all this, the government announces the name Hope. The public revolts against this, and no one buys the explanation that the name refers to the defeat of the kaiju and not the monster itself. Frustrated by this setback, the government takes it out on the special forces, stripping them of command over the entire operation. Arata is introduced to Masago, head of the newly created kaiju removal unit. She claims to be an expert in kaiju removal, ignoring the fact that this has never happened before. Her first step in the plan is to freeze the body. Arata says this will go wrong, as it will melt by morning, and the stench will get even worse. Masago remains unfazed and claims this is a defeatist attitude. The discussion escalates into a physical fight, but Arata stands no chance against the armed group of soldiers under Masago's orders. Meanwhile, a massive bubble is growing on the body. No one knows what it is or how to make it disappear quickly. Someone suggests asking the Americans for help, but Otachime claims they will want a cut of the profits when tourism flourishes. The next day, the freezing begins, and it is a complete disaster, as the internal temperature rises and melts everything. Now the bubble is 3 times larger and threatening to explode. One of the soldiers contacts the minister's office and requests permission to pierce the bubble, but Wataru fears that the hole will ruin the tourist value of the monument. While Amain requests 10 minutes to deliberate, the bubble keeps growing and finally bursts, expelling dark smoke that nearly suffocates everyone at the base. Soon the ministers are surrounded by journalists demanding an explanation for the disastrous freezing. The stench has increased so much that the restricted zone had to be extended by another 5 kilometers. The neighboring country withdraws its request for the return and starts making threats if the stench reaches them. Amain begins to blame the special forces, but Yukino says they were not in command. He loses his patience with his wife in the middle of the meeting, and Otachime tells the two to air their dirty laundry at home. Arata is surprised to see Amain at the base, informing him that he will lead the operations from now on. The last time they saw each other was 3 years ago, when Amain was still in the special forces. Chasing a strange beam of light, Yukino broke the rules and ended up causing a serious accident. Amain got his foot trapped, and Arata simply disappeared. He went missing for 2 years, and to this day, no one knows what happened. Back in the present, Shikishima tells Amain that a second bubble is already forming and the next explosion will affect an area twice as large. At that moment, an unusual visitor appears at the camp looking for Arata. He introduces himself as Yamikumo and says he has the solution to the problem. He shows a gas evacuation process that creates an artificial tornado, carrying the stinky gases up to the stratosphere. The only problem is that the initial drilling has to be very precise. A millimeter error could reverse the process and send the rotten wind downwards. Amain consults the Secretary General, but he is not very excited, especially upon learning that Yamikumo is a factory manager without a college degree. By this point, Sayuri is already losing patience with the delay. Hearing the minister call the kaiju excrement, Yukino has an idea. Thinking about flushing it down, she says the river water would solve the smell if they could sink the kaiju. That night, Yukino has a secret meeting with Arata. She explains her idea and asks for the special forces' help to blow up the dam. Arata says there is only one person capable of doing this in such a short time. It's her brother, whom everyone calls Blues. Yukino says she will talk to him. Before leaving, she asks Arata if he will ever explain where he was during those 2 years of disappearance. A bit annoyed, he promises to tell the truth after all of this is over. Arata extends his hand to seal the agreement, but Yukino prefers a kiss and says she still loves him. At the same time, her husband is also having a secret meeting. Not with the mistress, but with Dr. Inugami, who promises to analyze the images from the day the kaiju died. Amain has a secret theory about the event that he hasn't shared with anyone yet. Days later, Arata and Yuko go to talk to Blues, Yukino's brother, who has always been famous for his talent with explosives. Receiving Arata with a punch, he refuses to help the government and chases the agents away with dynamite. Later, Blues calmly lights a cigarette from the fuse and extinguishes it with his finger. Then we learn that Blues hates Arata because he disappeared just when he was about to marry Yukino. His mother ended up dying before fulfilling her big dream, which was to see her daughter married. However, when Blues is dining in a diner, the news reports that the bubble is worsening by the day, and the quarantine area will increase by another 5 kilometers. The waitress is devastated to realize that her own home will be affected and complains that she has nowhere to go. Blues starts to rethink his decision and ends up changing his mind. He arrives at the base in style, bringing a flamboyant group of helpers. Blues is amazed to see his brother-in-law back in the special forces, but Amain corrects him and says his rank is much higher. Since the water will flow with great force, the surrounding population of the dam is evacuated. At 8 o'clock, the last patrol checks to ensure no one is left behind. Seeing only a deer in the thicket, the guards report that the area is clear. However, what is there in the bushes is actually an influencer dressed as a deer, who evaded security to make a video of the kaiju. Shikishima confirms that the explosion will be at 4 in the morning, and everyone takes their positions to witness the flooding. When Blues presses the button, the spectacle is very disappointing. The explosion only opens a few holes through which the water flows slowly, lacking the necessary pressure to sink the kaiju. Apparently, Amain had mistakenly provided the blueprints for another dam, which messed up the calculations. Luckily, Blues has a backup bomb and rushes to activate it in time. Arata grows concerned upon seeing him enter the boat, but he says he always gets out of danger. Both at the Special Forces base and in the government office, everyone watches in suspense. Arata flies over the area calling for Blues on the radio but receives no response. Then the water finally arrives, and the monster begins to slide but does not sink. A crack opens in its body, releasing more horrible vapors and causing the bubble to shrink a bit. In another location, the influencer emerges from the river covered in slime, while Amain laughs to himself in the corridor. Everything he has done in the government has been to sabotage the operations, buying time to prove his theory. A few days later, Yukino and Arata visit Blues in the hospital and comment on the fiasco. In the government, the ministers want to take the chance to remove Amain from command, but he convinces Otochime to give him another chance by explaining the tornado scheme. Meanwhile, Arata is taking Yukino and Sayuri to see something concerning about the fungal filaments. Until now, the danger of explosions was only the intense odor, but now a side effect has appeared. Wearing protective clothing, they go to an isolation chamber and find the influencer covered in mushrooms. Sayuri takes the news to Otochime, who doesn't want to disclose the information. While the two are talking, Yukino sees a mushroom growing from the back of the minister's neck and yanks it out before anyone notices. Arriving home, Yukino sees her husband in his Special Forces uniform. He looks depressed and begins talking about the legend of the Chosen One, an invincible hero of sorts. To his wife's surprise, he says this might have something to do with Arata's disappearance. She begins asking questions about the crazy theory, but Amane says he has already said too much. Back at Dr. Inugami's, he asks about the analysis results. The scientist reveals that in some of the images, there is a shadow in the center of the light. When Amane asks if this is really relevant, Inugami says the shadow has a recognizable shape. Entering the laboratory, the metal detector begins to beep, revealing that Amane has a mechanical leg. Distrustful of him, Arata and Yukino meet at her old house. Arata says Amane will use the tornado technique wrongly, ignoring Yamikumo's precise instructions. Anticipating another disaster, the two decide to do everything possible to stop him. Hours later, Yukino leaks the photo of the influencer and submits her resignation. Then she goes to the base and discovers that Amane intends to blow the bubble with missiles. She pleads with her husband to rethink, but he ignores her. The situation in Otoshime's office is complete chaos. The ministers are frantic, and Sayuri even assaults Takanaka. At the Special Forces base, the operation is paused when someone spots Arata on top of the kaiju. He is following Blue's instructions to carry out the procedure alone. Yukino panics as she sees her beloved in the missile's path. Stealing a police motorcycle, she tells Yuko that they need to prevent the tragedy. As Arata pierces the surface, the tornado begins to form around the bubble, proving Yamikumo's theory. Then he starts to climb the monster to make the hole from above. But the internal pressure still hasn't decreased, and the bubble could explode at any moment. Using this as an excuse, Amane orders the immediate launch of the missiles. At the top of the bubble, Arata sees two mushrooms growing from his fist and tears them off. He also sees the missiles approaching, but a third projectile hits them both, sending the explosion away from him. Then we see this was the work of Yuko, applying her drone experience. As the internal pressure continues to rise, Amane authorizes one more missile and says he will finally discover Arata's true identity. At the same time, Arata makes the final hole, and steam starts to escape. The whirlpool intertwines with the larger one, just as in the simulation. But the missile arrives before the result confirms, hitting the bubble and causing Arata to fall from the heights. Yukino is running toward the kaiju when the explosion occurs, and liters of slime begin to fall into the river. She starts crying in despair, but then sees that Arata is just a few meters away, already getting up. Without letting her get close, he raises his arm and says, Deus Ex Machina. An intense light erupts around him, and his shadow begins to grow until it takes on gigantic proportions. Watching the scene on the cameras, Amane is moved to confirm his theory. Arata is the chosen one, and he once again saves the country, lifting the body of the kaiju into the stratosphere.